The Christmas tree lights blurred through my tears as I stood frozen in the Hartwell family kitchen, still feeling the phantom warmth of Margaret Hartwell's embrace. Just seconds before, she had pulled me close, with what I thought was genuine affection, whispering what I assumed would be warm holiday wishes. Instead, her words hit me like ice water. "You'll never be family, dear. He belongs to her." I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss.
I'm Chelsea Morrison, and 3 days ago, I thought I was about to experience my first perfect Christmas as part of the family I'd always dreamed of joining. Today, I'm questioning everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the people we trust most. 6 months earlier, everything in my life had fallen into perfect alignment. I was working as a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, finally in a career that felt like more than just a job. After years of struggling through nursing school while working nights at a diner, I had found my calling helping sick children and supporting their frightened families. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but it gave my life a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. My personal life had been a different story entirely. At 28, I'd already endured a string of relationships that left me wondering if I was fundamentally unsuited for love. There was Derek, who turned out to be married, Ryan, who disappeared the moment I mentioned wanting something serious, and Marcus, who seemed perfect until I discovered his idea of commitment was seeing me twice a week while maintaining active dating profiles. Each disappointment had chipped away at my optimism, leaving me increasingly convinced that the kind of love I saw in movies was nothing more than fiction designed to make lonely people feel worse about their reality. I'd started to accept that maybe I was destined to be the friend who attended everyone else's weddings, the aunt who spoiled other people's children, the woman who built a meaningful career instead of a meaningful relationship. Then I met Nathan Hartwell on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, and everything changed. I was grabbing coffee before my shift when the barista called out an order for Nathan. The man who stepped forward to claim his drink was tall and lean, with the kind of easy smile that made you want to smile back without thinking about it. He had sandy brown hair that looked perpetually tousled, as if he'd just run his fingers through it, and green eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. But it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention. It was what happened next. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, had been sitting with her grandmother at a nearby table, coloring in a princess coloring book. When she dropped her box of crayons, sending them scattering across the floor, Nathan immediately knelt down to help gather them up. But instead of just collecting the crayons and handing them back, he spent several minutes talking with her about her artwork, asking thoughtful questions about why she'd chosen purple for the princess's dress and whether the castle needed more windows. The grandmother looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness I recognized from the hospital, the weariness of someone caring for a sick child. Nathan seemed to sense this too. When he stood up, he quietly paid for their breakfast before heading to his own table, never mentioning his gesture or seeking acknowledgement. I watched this entire interaction while waiting for my own order, struck by the genuine kindness of a stranger who took time to brighten a child's morning and ease an overwhelmed caregiver's burden. When he caught me looking and offered that easy smile, I found myself walking over to his cable. "That was really sweet what you did," I said, suddenly feeling awkward about approaching him. He looked genuinely puzzled. What did I do? His confusion seemed authentic, not false modesty. This was someone who performed acts of kindness so naturally that he barely registered them as noteworthy. We ended up talking for 20 minutes before I had to rush to work, and by the time I left, he'd asked for my number, and I'd said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Cherry Creek, the kind of place where the owner knew most of the customers by name, and the walls were covered with photos of families celebrating decades of milestones. Nathan had chosen it, he explained, because the owner's son had been one of his students the previous year, and he wanted to support local businesses whenever possible. Nathan taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary, a public school in a working-class neighborhood where many of his students qualified for free lunch programs. He talked about his kids, and he genuinely referred to them as his kids. with the kind of passion and protective love usually reserved for discussing one's own children. He knew not just their academic strengths and challenges, but their home situations, their dreams, their fears. When 8-year-old Maria's father was deployed overseas, Nathan made sure she had someone to talk to about missing him. When Timothy struggled with reading, Nathan stayed after school 3 days a week to work with him, never making the boy feel stupid or behind. When the class guinea pig died unexpectedly, Nathan helped his students plan a funeral complete with handmade flowers and heartfelt eulogies, understanding that for many of them, this might be their first experience with loss. As he shared these stories over plates of homemade pasta, I found myself falling for not just Nathan's kindness, but his authenticity. He didn't tell these stories to impress me or paint himself as a hero. He told them because his students were genuinely the most important part of his life, and sharing that part of himself felt natural and necessary.
Our relationship developed with the kind of organic ease I'd never experienced before. We discovered we both loved hiking the trails around Boulder, though Nathan was far more adventurous about elevation and distance than my cautious nature preferred. We shared a passion for old movies, spending Sunday afternoons watching classics from the 40s and 50s, debating whether Humphrey Bogart was better in Casablanca or The Maltese Falcon. Nathan introduced me to rock climbing at a local indoor gym, patiently teaching me techniques while I struggled with my fear of heights. I taught him to cook more than the bachelor basics of pasta and sandwiches, sharing the skills my grandmother had passed down to me during summers spent in her tiny Montana kitchen. What struck me most about Nathan was his emotional intelligence. He seemed to understand instinctively when I needed space to decompress after a difficult shift at the hospital, and when I needed him to hold me while I processed the pain of losing a young patient. He never tried to fix my sadness or offer platitudes about everything happening for a reason. He simply provided steady, reliable support while I worked through my own emotions. The physical attraction was undeniable, too. Nathan had a way of looking at me that made me feel beautiful and desired in ways I'd never experienced. His touch was always gentle but confident, whether he was brushing a strand of hair from my face or pulling me close for a kiss that made me forget everything else in the world. We fit together perfectly, not just physically but emotionally, creating the kind of intimacy I'd stopped believing was possible. By February, we were spending most nights together, either at my small apartment near the hospital or his cozy house in the Highlands neighborhood. Nathan had bought the 1920s bungalow 2 years earlier, drawn to its original hardwood floors and the potential he saw in its overgrown backyard. We spent weekends working on home improvement projects, painting walls and planting vegetables, building something together that felt like a foundation for our future. The first time Nathan told me he loved me was on a camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. We were sitting by our campfire, watching stars appear in the clear mountain sky, when he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, vulnerable and certain at the same time. "Chelsea, I need you to know that I'm completely in love with you." The words weren't dramatic or rehearsed. They were simple and honest, and exactly what I needed to hear. When I told him I loved him too, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like we were simply acknowledging something that had been true for months. In May, Nathan proposed during a quiet moment in his backyard garden. He'd spent weeks preparing the space, planting flowers and hanging string lights between the apple trees. There was no elaborate public display or hired photographer, just the two of us, surrounded by the life we'd been building together, promising to make it official and permanent. The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the light beautifully without being ostentatious. Nathan had chosen it himself, he explained, because he wanted something as elegant and understated as I was. He'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, until he realized that every moment with me felt right. Our engagement period was blissful in ways that surprised me. After years of relationships that felt like constant work or negotiation, being with Nathan felt effortless. We agreed on the big things, wanting children someday, preferring a small wedding over an elaborate production, prioritizing experiences over material possessions. The small disagreements we had were easily resolved through honest conversation and compromise. We set our wedding date for the following spring and began making simple plans.
A ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens with close family and friends, a reception at a local restaurant known for its farm-to-table cuisine, a honeymoon hiking through national parks in Utah. Everything felt perfect and attainable, a reflection of our values and our vision for our life together. The only shadow on our happiness was something I couldn't quite articulate. Nathan's family lived in Colorado Springs, about an hour south of Denver, and while he spoke about them with obvious love, I sensed some underlying tension he was reluctant to discuss. His father, Robert, was a retired engineer who'd spent his career designing medical devices. His mother, Margaret, had been a high school English teacher before becoming a full-time mother and volunteer. His younger sister, Amanda, was completing her residency in cardiology at a prestigious hospital in San Francisco. From Nathan's descriptions, the Hartwells were accomplished, close-knit, and deeply proud of their children's achievements. Yet, whenever the topic of introducing me to them came up, Nathan found reasons to delay. They were traveling, his father was recovering from minor surgery, his sister was too busy with her residency to visit. The excuses were reasonable, but they formed a pattern that left me wondering if Nathan was embarrassed by me or uncertain about our future. When we finally did meet for dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Colorado Springs, I understood immediately why Nathan had been hesitant. The Hartwells weren't intentionally unwelcoming, but they operated at a level of sophistication and cultural refinement that made my working-class background feel glaringly obvious. Robert dominated the conversation with discussions of classical music and recent trips to European art museums. Margaret referenced books and plays I'd never heard of, assuming a level of cultural literacy I simply didn't possess. Amanda, visiting from San Francisco, spoke casually about exclusive restaurants and wine varieties with the confidence of someone accustomed to luxury.
I spent the evening feeling like an outsider, trying to decode a foreign language, smiling politely while understanding very little of what was being discussed. Nathan tried to include me, steering conversations toward topics where I could participate, but his efforts only highlighted how different I was from his family's expectations. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The invitation arrived on elegant cream-colored cardstock, Margaret Hartwell's flowing script inviting Nathan and me to spend Christmas at their Colorado Springs home. "It's time Chelsea experienced a proper Hartwell Christmas," she'd written, and despite my lingering anxiety about fitting in with his family, I felt hopeful. Maybe this would be the opportunity to prove I belonged in Nathan's world. Nathan was thrilled about the invitation, more excited than I'd seen him since our engagement. He spent weeks describing family traditions I'd soon experience: Christmas Eve dinner with multiple courses, opening presents by the massive fireplace on Christmas morning, his mother's legendary eggnog that she only made once a year. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely looking forward to being part of these cherished rituals. I spent considerable time and money choosing the perfect gifts for his family. For Robert, I selected a first-edition copy of a biography about Thomas Edison, knowing his fascination with inventors and engineering history. For Margaret, I found a rare cookbook from a famous French chef whose restaurant she'd mentioned visiting in Paris. For Amanda, I chose an elegant silk scarf from a local Denver boutique, something sophisticated enough to match her refined tastes. Most importantly, I had a special gift for Nathan, a leather-bound photo album documenting our relationship from our first coffee shop meeting through our engagement. I'd spent hours selecting and arranging photos, writing captions that captured the memories and emotions of each moment. It was personal and heartfelt, exactly the kind of meaningful gift that represented our connection. The drive to Colorado Springs on December 23rd was magical. Fresh snow had blanketed the landscape, transforming the familiar highway into a winter wonderland. Nathan held my hand while driving, occasionally lifting it to his lips for gentle kisses, talking animatedly about childhood Christmas memories and how excited he was to share them with me. "Wait until you taste Mom's Christmas Eve lasagna," he said, eyes sparkling with anticipation. "She's been perfecting the recipe for 20 years. And Dad always does his dramatic reading of A Christmas Carol after dinner. He does all the voices: Scrooge, Tiny Tim, the ghosts. It's ridiculously theatrical, but it's become this beloved tradition."
His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely looking forward to being part of these cherished rituals. The Hartwell house was even more impressive than I had remembered from driving past it during my first visit. A sprawling Tudor-style home in one of Colorado Springs' most prestigious neighborhoods, it was decorated for Christmas with the kind of tasteful elegance I associated with magazine spreads. Warm light glowed from every window, and a magnificent wreath adorned the front door, complete with burgundy velvet ribbon and real pine cones. Margaret answered the door wearing a stunning red cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored black plants, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob that looked like she had just stepped out of a salon. She embraced Nathan with obvious maternal love, holding him just a beat longer than necessary, before turning to me with a smile that seemed warm and genuine. "Chelsea, darling, welcome to our home," she said, pulling me into what felt like a sincere hug. "I'm so glad you could spend Christmas with us. Nathan's been counting down the days." Her greeting felt authentic, and I allowed myself to relax slightly. Maybe I'd been overthinking the family dynamics. Maybe this Christmas would be the bonding experience that finally made me feel like part of the Hartwell family. Robert emerged from his study, immediately engaging Nathan in animated conversation about a recent article he'd read about renewable energy innovations. Amanda arrived from the airport shortly after us, looking effortlessly chic despite traveling, her residency schedule having finally allowed her a few days away from San Francisco. The house itself was a masterpiece of holiday decorating. A 12-foot Fraser fir dominated the living room, decorated with what appeared to be decades of collected ornaments, each one carefully placed to create perfect visual balance. Garland draped every mantelpiece and staircase banister, intertwined with subtle white lights that cast everything in a warm golden glow. Fresh flowers filmed crystal vases throughout the house, white roses, holly branches, and winter greenery arranged with professional skill. The dining room table was set with china I was afraid to touch, crystal glasses that caught the light like prisms, and silver so polished it reflected the candlelight perfectly. Everything was beautiful, sophisticated, and intimidating in its perfection. I felt like I was visiting a museum rather than a family home, constantly worried about touching something valuable or making a mess on the pristine surfaces. Christmas Eve dinner was an elaborate affair that began with champagne and appetizers in the living room. Margaret served delicate canapés topped with ingredients I couldn't identify, while Robert poured wine he described as a particularly excellent vintage from a small vineyard in Burgundy. The conversation flowed easily between topics I struggled to follow: recent exhibitions at art museums, books by authors I'd never read, political developments analyzed with the kind of intellectual sophistication that made me feel intellectually inadequate.
I tried to contribute when possible, sharing stories from my work at the hospital or asking thoughtful questions about their interests. Nathan helped by steering conversations toward subjects where I could participate more naturally, but I could sense his family's polite confusion about my background and experiences. The dinner itself was spectacular. Multiple courses served on different sets of dishes, each accompanied by carefully selected wines and detailed explanations of preparation methods. Margaret's lasagna was indeed remarkable, layered with ingredients that elevated it far beyond any lasagna I'd ever tasted. The presentation was restaurant quality, garnished with fresh herbs and served alongside perfectly seasoned vegetables and artisanal bread. Throughout the meal, I watched the family interact with the kind of easy intimacy that comes from years of shared experiences and similar worldviews. They referenced inside jokes, finished each other's sentences, and communicated through subtle gestures and expressions that spoke to their deep understanding of one another. Robert's reading of A Christmas Carol after dinner was indeed theatrical and charming, but it also highlighted the family's shared cultural references and appreciation for literature that felt foreign to my own background. They quoted passages along with him, laughed at subtle humor I didn't catch, and participated in a ritual that clearly held deep meaning for all of them. I found myself feeling like a respectful observer rather than a participant, watching a beautiful family tradition while remaining fundamentally outside of it. Nathan tried to include me, explaining references and encouraging my participation, but his efforts only emphasized how different my own family's Christmas traditions were. We'd always had simple celebrations, Chinese takeout on Christmas Eve because my mother worked double shifts at the diner, presents wrapped in newspaper because fancy paper was an unnecessary expense, traditions built around practicality rather than elegance. There was nothing wrong with our way of celebrating, but in this context, it felt embarrassingly inadequate. After dinner, we moved to the living room for more wine and conversation. Amanda regaled us with stories from her residency, describing complex surgical procedures and the high-pressure environment of her training program. Her intelligence and dedication were impressive, but she spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. Robert shared updates about his volunteer work with the local symphony and his book club's recent selections, discussing authors and musical compositions with the kind of casual expertise that comes from lifelong cultural engagement. Robert talked about his latest woodworking project, crafting a piece of furniture with techniques he'd learned from a master craftsman in Germany. Even their hobbies and volunteer activities were sophisticated, requiring knowledge and skills I didn't possess. I felt increasingly like an imposter, smiling and nodding while understanding very little of what was being discussed around me. The evening concluded with Margaret playing piano, classical pieces performed with obvious skill and years of training. The family gathered around the instrument, singing traditional Christmas carols in harmony that suggested they'd done this countless times before. Nathan's voice blended beautifully with his family's, and I could see how much this musical tradition meant to all of them. I participated as best I could, but my voice felt rough and untrained compared to their polished harmonies. When Margaret suggested I try a solo verse of Silent Night, my attempt was met with encouraging smiles that felt more patronizing than supportive. As we prepared for bed in Nathan's childhood room, I tried to shake off my feelings of inadequacy. The family had been kind and welcoming, including me in their traditions and treating me with obvious respect. My discomfort was probably more about my own insecurities than any actual rejection on their part. Nathan was glowing with happiness as we settled into the twin beds in his old room, decorated with childhood memorabilia and academic awards that told the story of his successful youth. "Wasn't that wonderful?" he asked, his voice filled with contentment. "I knew they'd love having you here. Mom seemed especially happy to have another woman around for Christmas." I agreed that the evening had been lovely, not wanting to dampen his joy with my own complicated feelings. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe Christmas morning would provide the bonding opportunity I'd been hoping for, the chance to finally find my place in this accomplished, loving family. But as I lay awake in the narrow twin bed, listening to Nathan's peaceful breathing and the unfamiliar sounds of his childhood home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was playing a role in someone else's story, trying to fit into a narrative where I would always be an outsider looking in. The next morning would change everything, but I fell asleep still hoping that Christmas Day would bring the acceptance and belonging I'd been desperately seeking since the moment I'd first met the Hartwell family. Christmas morning began with the kind of pristine beauty that belonged in a holiday movie. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the Hartwell property in unmarked white that sparkled like diamonds in the early sunlight. From Nathan's childhood bedroom window, I watched cardinals dart between snow-laden pine branches, their red feathers brilliant against the monochrome landscape. Nathan was already awake, sitting on the edge of his twin bed with the enthusiasm of a child on Christmas morning. "Come on," he whispered, grinning at me with infectious excitement. "Come on, Mom always has coffee and cinnamon rolls by 7, and then we do stockings before the big present opening."
I pulled on the cashmere sweater I'd bought specifically for this occasion, hoping it would help me blend in with the family's understated elegance. Nathan had warned me that Margaret always took photos on Christmas morning, and I wanted to look like I belonged in their family album. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, with Margaret already dressed impeccably in a cream-colored wool dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She greeted us with warm hugs and steaming mugs of what turned out to be the most delicious coffee I'd ever tasted, some exotic blend she'd ordered specially for the holidays. The cinnamon rolls were homemade, glazed to perfection, and served on delicate china plates alongside fresh berries arranged with artistic precision.
Even breakfast at the Hartwell house was an occasion for beauty and refinement, a stark contrast to the grab-and-go meals I was accustomed to during my busy hospital shifts. Robert and Amanda joined us shortly after, both looking refreshed despite the early hour. Amanda had somehow managed to make her hair look salon perfect, and Robert wore a sweater that looked hand-knitted and expensive. Everything about this family seemed effortless, as if they naturally gravitated towards sophistication without conscious effort. The stoking tradition took place in the living room, where each family member had a perfectly coordinated stocking hanging from the mantelpiece. Margaret had thoughtfully prepared one for me as well, a beautiful needlepoint creation that matched the family stockings perfectly, filled with small wrapped gifts that showed considerable thought and care. Inside my stocking, I found expensive hand cream from a French boutique, gourmet chocolates, a silk scarf in my favorite shade of blue, and a small jewelry box containing elegant pearl earrings. Each gift was tasteful and lovely, chosen with obvious care for my preferences. Margaret's thoughtfulness touched me deeply, and I felt a rush of warmth toward this woman who had welcomed me so graciously into her family's most intimate traditions. "Thank you so much, Margaret," I said, genuinely moved by her generosity. "These are absolutely beautiful. You didn't need to go to such trouble." She waved away my thanks with a smile that seemed entirely genuine. "Nonsense, dear. You're family now. Of course you deserve the full Christmas treatment." Her words made my heart swell with happiness. Maybe I'd been overthinking the cultural differences. Maybe acceptance into this family was simply a matter of time and shared experiences. The main gift exchange was an elaborate affair conducted with the kind of ritualized precision I was beginning to recognize as typical Hartwell style. Everyone had assigned spots around the tree, and gifts were opened one at a time so each present could be properly admired and appreciated. Robert's gifts reflected his intellectual interests: rare books, a vintage compass for his collection, an expensive telescope for his amateur astronomy hobby. Margaret received art supplies for her watercolor painting, first edition poetry books, and a trip to a prestigious cooking school in France that made her eyes light up with delight. Amanda's presents were appropriately sophisticated for her medical career: a luxury stethoscope, medical journals, and jewelry that looked like it belonged in a museum. Each gift was presented beautifully, wrapped in coordinated paper with elaborate bows that must have taken hours to create. Nathan's gifts from his family were equally thoughtful: hiking equipment for his outdoor adventures, books about educational theory for his teaching career, and a beautiful watch that apparently had been his grandfather's. Everything was meaningful, expensive, and perfectly suited to the recipient. When it came time for me to give my carefully chosen gifts, I felt confident about my selections. I'd put considerable thought and research into each one, and they reflected genuine understanding of the recipient's interests. Robert seemed pleased with the Edison biography, thanking me warmly and immediately beginning to flip through its pages. Margaret's cookbook received polite appreciation, though I noticed she set it aside quickly without examining it thoroughly. Amanda thanked me for the scarf with what appeared to be genuine gratitude, though she didn't try it on or comment on its quality. Their responses were perfectly polite and appropriately grateful, but something felt muted about their reactions. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was different, but their enthusiasm seemed less authentic than when they'd opened gifts from each other. Nathan's reaction to my photo album was everything I'd hoped for. His face lit up as he turned each page, laughing at memories and pointing out favorite photos to his family. "Look at this one from our camping trip," he said, showing them a picture of us by a mountain lake. "And here's Chelsea teaching me to make her grandmother's apple pie." But as Nathan shared our memories, I noticed his family's responses growing increasingly restrained. They smiled politely at the photos, made appropriate comments about how happy we looked together, but there was a distance in their reactions that I couldn't ignore. Margaret, in particular, seemed to be studying the photos with an expression I couldn't read. Her smile remained in place, but something in her eyes had shifted, becoming more analytical than warm. The gift exchange concluded with Margaret presenting me with an unexpected surprise: a beautiful silver bracelet with a single charm in the shape of a heart.
This was my grandmother's, she explained as she fastened it around my wrist. I've been saving it for the right occasion.
The gesture was deeply meaningful, and I felt tears spring to my eyes at her generosity. Giving me a family heirloom felt like the ultimate acceptance, a clear signal that she considered me worthy of joining their family legacy. Margaret, I don't know what to say, I managed, genuinely overwhelmed by the gesture. This is incredibly special. Thank you for trusting me with something so precious. She patted my hand gently. You're going to be Nathan's wife. It belongs with you now. After the presents were opened and the wrapping paper cleared away, the family settled into comfortable conversation while I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back to the living room, I passed Margaret's study and was surprised to hear my name mentioned in a hushed conversation. I paused outside the partially open door, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to help overhearing fragments of what was clearly a serious discussion between Margaret and Amanda. I don't think she's right for him, Amanda was saying, her voice low but distinct. She's nice enough, but they're from completely different worlds. I know, Margaret replied, her tone heavy with concern. I've been watching them all morning, and it's obvious she doesn't really understand our family or our values. Did you see how confused she looked during Dad's reading last night? My heart began to pound as I realized they were discussing me, analyzing my performance as a potential family member and finding me lacking. Nathan's always been attracted to projects. Remember in high school when he tried to save every stray animal in the neighborhood? This feels similar. He sees someone who needs rescuing and mistakes that impulse for love. The problem is, he genuinely thinks he's happy, but I can see how hard she's trying to fit in, how uncomfortable she is with our lifestyle. That's not sustainable long term. I pressed myself against the wall, horrified by what I was hearing, but unable to walk away. These women were dissecting my relationship with Nathan, questioning the very foundation of our love while he sat unsuspectingly in the next room. What about Veronica? Amanda asked, and my blood ran cold at the mention of another woman's name. She's been asking about him every time I see her. They have so much more in common, the same background, the same interests, the same goals. Veronica Williams has loved Nathan since they were teenagers. She's everything I always hoped he'd find. Intelligent, accomplished, from a good family. If only he could see what's right in front of him. Veronica Williams. I'd never heard Nathan mention this name, but from their conversation, it was clear she was someone significant from his past, someone his family preferred over me. Maybe Christmas will help him realize, Amanda suggested. Seeing Chelsea struggle to fit in, watching her try so hard to understand our family dynamic, it has to be obvious even to Nathan that this isn't working. I hope so, Margaret replied. I love Nathan too much to watch him make a mistake that will make him miserable for the rest of his life. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, my mind reeling from what I'd discovered. The warm acceptance I'd felt from Margaret all morning had been an act. Her thoughtful gifts, her gracious inclusion in family traditions, her meaningful gesture with the bracelet, it was all part of some elaborate performance designed to demonstrate to Nathan how wrong I was for their family. But who was Veronica Williams, and why had Nathan never mentioned someone who apparently held such significance in his family's eyes? I made it back to the living room and settled beside Nathan on the couch, trying to compose my expression while my thoughts raced. He smiled at me and reached for my hand, completely unaware that his mother and sister had just spent 10 minutes discussing how unsuitable I was for him. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing something in my expression. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," I managed to say, squeezing his hand and forcing a smile. "It's been such a wonderful morning." But as I sat, surrounded by the Hartwell family's warm Christmas atmosphere, I felt like an imposter who had just discovered that everyone else was aware of my deception. The beautiful bracelet on my wrist now felt like a weight,
a reminder that even Margaret's most generous gestures came with hidden motivations. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I participated in conversations, helped with lunch preparations, and played the role of the grateful, happy fiancé while my mind churned with questions and doubts. Who was Veronica Williams, and why did Margaret and Amanda believe she was Nathan's perfect match? How long had his family been hoping our relationship would fail? And most importantly, what did Nathan really know about their feelings towards me?
As we sat down to Christmas lunch, I realized this perfect holiday was about to become something very different from what I had expected. The investigation into my own relationship had begun, whether I wanted it or not. Christmas lunch was an exquisite affair that felt like torture. Margaret had prepared honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables that looked like they belonged in a gourmet magazine, and side dishes that required culinary techniques I'd never heard of. The presentation was flawless, the conversation cultured and engaging, and I sat through it all feeling like a fraud who had accidentally wandered into someone else's life. Every bite of food tasted like ash in my mouth as I replayed the overheard conversation between Margaret and Amanda. The name Veronica Williams echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, and I found myself studying Nathan's face for any sign that he was aware of his family's true feelings about our relationship. He seemed genuinely happy, participating enthusiastically in family discussions about local politics, upcoming cultural events, and shared memories from previous holidays. His love for his family was evident in every gesture, every laugh, every inside joke he explained to help me feel included. But was he really oblivious to their reservations about me, or was he simply choosing to ignore them? After lunch, Robert suggested we take a family walk through the neighborhood to see the Christmas decorations and work off some of the feast we'd consumed. The idea was appealing. Fresh air and movement might help clear my head and give me space to process what I'd learned. The Colorado Springs neighborhood was like something from a postcard, with grand homes decorated in tasteful holiday displays that complemented their architectural elegance. Margaret and Robert walked ahead, pointing out houses of friends and sharing anecdotes about the families who lived behind each perfectly manicured facade. Nathan and Amanda fell into step beside me, their conversation turning to childhood memories of Christmas walks through these same streets. Remember when you convinced me that Mrs. Henderson's house was actually Santa's workshop? Nathan asked his sister, gesturing toward an elaborate Victorian decorated with thousands of twinkling lights. You were so gullible, Amanda laughed. I had you believing that for 3 whole years. You used to leave extra cookies on her doorstep because you thought Santa would get hungry working so late. Their sibling banter was warm and affectionate, but I noticed how naturally they slipped into shared memories that excluded me entirely. Every story, every reference, every joke was rooted in a history I would never be part of, no matter how long Nathan and I were together. As we paused to admire a particularly stunning light display, Amanda's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "It's Veronica," she announced to the group. "I should take this. She's been trying to reach me all week." My heart stopped. Here was my chance to finally learn something concrete about the mysterious woman Margaret and Amanda considered so perfect for Nathan. "Ronnie," Amanda said warmly into the phone, walking a few steps away from our group, but remaining within earshot. "Merry Christmas! How's the holiday going?" I strained to listen while pretending to admire the Christmas decorations, hoping to catch any details about this woman who apparently represented everything I wasn't. "Oh, you're kidding!" Amanda exclaimed with delight. "You got the fellowship? At Johns Hopkins? Ronnie, that's incredible! I'm so proud of you!" A fellowship at Johns Hopkins. So Veronica Williams was not only from Nathan's past, but also highly accomplished in medicine just like Amanda. The pieces were beginning to form a picture that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Wait, let me put you on speaker so everyone can hear your news," Amanda said, returning to our group with obvious excitement. "Mom, Dad, Nathan, you'll never guess what Veronica just told me." Margaret's face immediately brightened at the mention of Veronica's name, while Robert looked pleased and interested. Nathan's expression was harder to read. Surprised, perhaps, or maybe just curious about what news warranted interrupting our family walk. "Hi, everyone," came a warm, cultured voice through Amanda's phone speaker. The voice was confident, articulate, and carried the kind of refined accent that suggested excellent education and sophisticated background. "Merry Christmas to the whole Hartwell clan," Margaret responded with genuine warmth that I'd never heard her use when speaking to my friends or family. "Amanda says you have exciting news to share." "I just found out this morning that I've been accepted for a cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at Johns Hopkins. It's a 2-year program working with some of the best cardiac surgeons in the country." "Veronica, that's absolutely wonderful," Robert exclaimed. "Johns Hopkins, that's quite an achievement. Your parents must be thrilled." "They are," she laughed, "though Mom's already worried about me being so far from home. But it's such an incredible opportunity, I couldn't pass it up."
Nathan finally spoke, and I watched his face carefully as he addressed this woman from his past. "Congratulations, Ronnie," he said warmly. "That's a huge accomplishment. You've worked so hard for this." The familiarity in his voice, the casual use of her nickname, the genuine pleasure in his congratulations, it all suggested a relationship that had been significant and comfortable. How significant? And why had he never mentioned her to me? "Thank you, Nathan," Veronica replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I know it means a lot coming from you. Your opinion has always mattered to me." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with the entire family participating enthusiastically in celebrating Veronica's achievement. They asked detailed questions about her program, her research interests, her future career plans. Their engagement was natural and genuine, the kind of investment you show in someone you truly care about. What struck me most was how seamlessly Veronica fit into their conversation style. She referenced shared experiences, made sophisticated jokes that everyone understood immediately, and spoke with the kind of cultural fluency that made her sound like a natural member of their social circle. When the call ended, the family continued discussing Veronica's news with obvious pride and excitement. "She's always been so driven," Margaret said admiringly. "Even in high school, she knew exactly what she wanted to accomplish." "Remember her valedictorian speech?" Robert added. "Such poise and intelligence for someone so young. She's exactly the kind of person who makes you optimistic about the next generation." "She and Nathan would have made such a power couple in medicine," Amanda mused, then seemed to catch herself, glancing quickly at me with a guilty expression. "I mean, if Nathan had decided to pursue medicine instead of teaching." The comment hung in the air awkwardly, and I felt Nathan tense beside me. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently in what I assumed was meant to be reassurance, but the gesture felt more defensive than comforting. "Teaching is Nathan's calling," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since the phone call began. "He's amazing with his students. Not everyone is meant to be a doctor." "Of course," Margaret said quickly, but her tone suggested she didn't entirely agree. "Nathan's work with children is admirable. It's just that Veronica and he always shared such similar academic interests and career ambitions." As we resumed our walk, I found myself piecing together fragments of information about Veronica Williams. She was clearly from their social circle, highly accomplished academically, pursuing a prestigious medical career, and had some kind of significant history with Nathan that their family remembered fondly. More importantly, she represented everything I wasn't: educated in their world, comfortable with their cultural references, ambitious in ways they understood and respected. She was quite literally the daughter-in-law Margaret had always envisioned for Nathan. Back at the house, the family settled into afternoon activities that felt designed to showcase their sophisticated leisure pursuits.
Margaret and Anna worked on a complex jigsaw puzzle featuring a reproduction of a famous Monet painting, discussing art history and technique while they sorted pieces. Robert retreated to his study to work on correspondence, writing thank you notes in elegant fountain pen script on personal stationery that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Nathan suggested we play a board game, pulling out options that required strategic thinking and cultural knowledge I wasn't sure I possessed. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead found myself wandering through the house trying to understand the world Nathan had grown up in and the expectations that had shaped his family's vision of his future. In the hallway outside Nathan's childhood bedroom, I discovered a gallery of family photographs spanning decades. Wedding photos, graduation pictures, vacation snapshots, holiday celebrations. The visual history of a family that had consistently achieved success and maintained their social standing across generations. But it was one particular photograph that stopped me cold. Buried among dozens of other images was a prom photo featuring a teenage Nathan in a classic tuxedo, his arm around a stunning young woman in an elegant gown. Even at 17 or 18 years old, she possessed the kind of natural grace and beauty that photographs couldn't fully capture. Her smile was confident and genuine, her posture perfect, her entire presence radiating the kind of effortless sophistication I'd been trying unsuccessfully to achieve all weekend. At the bottom of the frame, written in Margaret's careful script, were the words, Nathan and Veronica, Prom 2015. This was Veronica Williams, and seeing them with Nathan, seeing how perfectly they looked together even as teenagers, I understood exactly why his family believed I was a temporary mistake rather than his permanent future. She was everything I could never be. Beautiful, accomplished, from their world, comfortable in their environment, and clearly someone Nathan had cared about deeply enough to take to his senior prom. The photograph captured a moment of young love and promise, two people who seemed destined for a sophisticated life together.
Standing in that hallway, staring at evidence of Nathan's past with this perfect woman, I realized that the overheard conversation between Margaret and Amanda wasn't just idle speculation. They had a specific alternative in mind, someone they genuinely believed would make Nathan happier than I ever could. The question that terrified me most wasn't whether Veronica Williams was better suited for Nathan. The answer to that seemed obvious. The question was whether Nathan knew she was coming back into their lives, whether he was aware of his family's hopes for a reunion, and whether part of him might agree that she represented a better choice than the working-class nurse who was trying so desperately to fit into a world where she would always be an outsider. As I heard Nathan calling my name from downstairs, I took one last look at the photograph of him with Veronica, memorizing every detail of their perfect young faces. Then I composed myself and went to rejoin the family, knowing that the rest of this Christmas would be spent wondering if I was fighting a battle I'd already lost. The afternoon dragged on with suffocating politeness while I carried the weight of everything I'd discovered. Every smile felt forced. Every conversation felt loaded with hidden meaning, and the prom photograph of Nathan and Veronica burned in my memory like a brand. I moved through the family's elegant afternoon activities feeling like an actor who had forgotten her lines, desperately trying to play a role I was never meant for. Around 4 o'clock, Margaret announced she needed help preparing Christmas dinner, and I immediately volunteered, hoping that kitchen work might provide some normalcy and a chance to prove my usefulness. At least in the kitchen, I knew what I was doing. My grandmother had taught me well, and my years of quick meals between hospital shifts had made me efficient and capable. "That's so sweet of you to offer, dear," Margaret said with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "I could definitely use another pair of hands. The turkey needs basting, and I still have to prepare the Yorkshire pudding." Working alongside Margaret in her pristine kitchen initially felt like a step toward the acceptance I'd been craving. She moved with practiced efficiency, orchestrating multiple dishes with the skill of someone who had been hosting elaborate dinner parties for decades. I tried to match her pace and precision, determined to show that I could contribute meaningfully to her family's traditions.
For about an hour, we worked in companionable silence, with me following her detailed instructions for preparing vegetables and side dishes. Margaret seemed genuinely pleased with my help, complimenting my knife skills and thanking me for being so thorough with my assigned tasks. "You're quite handy in the kitchen," she observed as I finished arranging roasted vegetables on a serving platter. "Nathan mentioned you're an excellent cook." The compliment felt genuine, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that maybe I was overthinking the family dynamics. Maybe the overheard conversation had been taken out of context. Maybe the prom photograph was ancient history. Maybe Margaret really was warming up to me as Nathan's chosen partner. That fragile hope shattered completely when Margaret's phone rang and Veronica Williams' name appeared on the screen. "Oh, how lovely!" Margaret exclaimed, immediately answering the call with obvious delight. "Veronica, darling, we were just talking about you earlier. Hold on, let me put you on speaker. I'm in the kitchen with Chelsea, Nathan's fiancé." My heart began racing as Margaret placed the phone on the counter between us, making this conversation unavoidable. I continued working on the vegetables, trying to look busy and uninterested, while every nerve in my body strained to catch every word. "Hi, Chelsea." Veronica's voice came through clearly, warm, and friendly with that same cultured confidence I had noticed earlier. "It's so nice to finally meet you, even if it's just over the phone. Nathan's told me so much about you." The casual way she said this hit me like a physical blow. Nathan had been talking to Veronica about me? When? How often? And why had he never mentioned these conversations? "It's nice to meet you, too," I managed to respond, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Margaret, I'm actually calling because I have some news that might interest the whole family," Veronica continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The fellowship at Johns Hopkins doesn't start until July, which means I'll be back in Colorado for the next 6 months. I watched Margaret's face light up with pure joy at this announcement. "Veronica, that's wonderful news. 6 whole months to spend with your family before you head off to Baltimore." "Well, that's the thing," Veronica said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I was hoping to spend some of that time reconnecting with old friends, especially Nathan. We've been texting occasionally, but it's been years since we've had real quality time together." The vegetables I was arranging suddenly seemed to require enormous concentration as I processed this information. Nathan and Veronica had been texting? He'd never mentioned staying in touch with anyone from high school, let alone someone who was clearly more than just a casual acquaintance. "I think that's a marvelous idea," Margaret said enthusiastically. "Nathan would love to catch up with you properly, and Amanda will be thrilled to have you around before you leave for the East Coast."
Actually, Veronica continued, her voice taking on a slightly hesitant tone, "I was wondering if you thought it would be appropriate for me to call Nathan directly. I don't want to overstep any boundaries, especially with him being engaged now." The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that Margaret's answer would reveal more about her true feelings than any overheard conversation ever could. This was her opportunity to protect my relationship, to establish appropriate boundaries, to make it clear that Nathan was unavailable for romantic reconnection. Margaret glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable, before responding to Veronica with warmth that felt like a knife to my heart. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be silly," she said with obvious affection. "Nathan would be delighted to hear from you. Friendship doesn't end just because life circumstances change. I'm sure he'd love to hear about your fellowship and catch up on everything you've been doing." "Thank you, Margaret," Veronica replied, her relief evident. "I wasn't sure how to navigate the situation, but I've missed our talks so much. Nathan has such a unique perspective on things. He's always been the person I turn to for advice about important decisions." Nathan has always been the person she turns to for advice about important decisions? The intimacy implied by that statement was devastating. This wasn't casual friendship or distant acquaintanceship. This was someone who still considered Nathan a central figure in her emotional life. "Well then, you simply must call him tonight," Margaret encouraged warmly. "In fact, why don't you come for dinner this weekend? I know the whole family would love to see you, and we could properly celebrate your fellowship news." "I would love that," Veronica replied immediately. "Should I check with Nathan first? Make sure it's okay with him?" Nonsense, Margaret said firmly. Consider yourself invited. Nathan will be thrilled. As the conversation concluded with warm goodbyes and promises to see each other soon, I stood frozen at the kitchen counter, my hands still mechanically arranging vegetables, while my world collapsed around me. Margaret had just invited Nathan's former girlfriend, someone who clearly still held deep emotional significance for him, to have dinner with our family without even consulting him or acknowledging that this might be problematic for his current relationship. The moment Veronica hung up, the kitchen fell into tense silence. Margaret continued her dinner preparations as if nothing significant had just occurred, but I could feel the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us both. "Margaret," I said finally, my voice carefully controlled, "can I ask you something?" She looked up from the turkey she was basting, her expression pleasantly neutral. "Of course, dear." "How long did Nathan and Veronica date?" The question was direct and unavoidable, and I watched Margaret's face carefully as she considered her response. For a moment, her composed mask slipped, revealing something that looked like guilt or discomfort. "They were quite close in high school. Young love, you know how it is. They remained friends after graduation, but life took them in different directions." "But they've stayed in touch," I pressed, feeling like I was finally getting somewhere. "You said they've been texting." Margaret set down her basting brush and turned to face me fully. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable, caught between her natural inclination toward politeness and her obvious investment in preserving whatever relationship existed between Nathan and Veronica. "Chelsea," she said carefully, "I think you may be misinterpreting the situation," but her tone lacked conviction. "Am I?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just invited Nathan's ex-girlfriend to dinner without consulting neither Nathan or his current fiancé. It looks like you're actively encouraging a relationship that threatens my engagement." Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. The mask of polite hospitality fell away, revealing the calculating woman I'd glimpsed in her conversation with Amanda that morning. "Chelsea," she said, her voice taking on a steely quality I'd never heard before, "I think we need to have an honest conversation." She moved closer to where I stood, and suddenly the spacious kitchen felt cramped and threatening. When she spoke again, her voice was low and intense, meant for my ears only.
"You seem like a perfectly nice young woman," she began. "But nice isn't enough for Nathan. He needs someone who can match his intellectual curiosity, someone who shares his cultural interests, someone who can grow with him as he advances in his career." Each word felt like a calculated attack on everything I was and everything I could offer Nathan. "Nathan deserves someone who doesn't have to try so hard to fit in," she continued relentlessly. "Someone who naturally understands our family values and traditions. Someone who can be a true partner in building the kind of life he was raised to expect." The kitchen suddenly felt airless, and I gripped the counter to steady myself as Margaret delivered what felt like a final, devastating blow. "Veronica Williams is that person, Chelsea. She always has been. And I think, deep down, Nathan knows it too." The words hung between us like a declaration of war. This was no longer about cultural differences or family dynamics. This was about Margaret's active intention to destroy my relationship and replace me with someone she considered more suitable. "What are you saying?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Margaret reached for me then, pulling me into what anyone observing would have interpreted as a warm maternal embrace. But her words, whispered directly into my ear, were the coldest thing I'd ever heard. "You'll never be family, dear. He belongs to her." The hug felt like a cage, and her words felt like a death sentence for everything Nathan and I had built together. When she finally released me, her expression had returned to its usual pleasant neutrality, as if she hadn't just shattered my entire world in her pristine kitchen. "Now," she said brightly, returning to her dinner preparations, "why don't you go find Nathan and tell him dinner will be ready in an hour?" I stood frozen for a moment, staring at this woman who had just delivered the most devastating blow of my life while maintaining the appearance of gracious hospitality. Then somehow I found my feet and walked out of that kitchen, carrying the weight of her words and the terrible knowledge that my fight for Nathan's love had just become a war I wasn't sure I could win.
I found Nathan in the living room, sitting by the fireplace with the book while soft Christmas music was playing in the background. He looked peaceful and content, completely unaware that his mother had just declared war on our relationship in her kitchen. The contrast between his serene happiness and my internal turmoil was almost unbearable. "Hey," he said, looking up with that warm smile that had first captured my heart. "How's the cooking going? Mom didn't put you to work too hard, did she?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. How do you tell someone you love that his mother has just systematically dismantled everything you thought you knew about your place in his life? How do you explain that the woman who raised him has been orchestrating your replacement? "Nathan, we need to talk right now." Something in my tone made him immediately close his book and give me his full attention. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need you to be completely honest with me about something," I began, sitting down across from him so I could see his face clearly. "Who is Veronica Williams to you?" The question hit Nathan like a physical blow. His expression shifted from concern to surprise to something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture he made when he was trying to buy time to think. "Where did that come from?" he asked, instead of answering directly. "Just answer the question, Nathan. Who is she?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fireplace as if the flames might provide him with the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and measured. "Veronica and I dated in high school. We were together for about 2 years. Pretty seriously for teenagers. We talked about going to the same college, maybe getting married someday, but we ended up at different universities and the long distance didn't work out." "But you've stayed in touch?" I pressed. Another pause, another guilty expression. "Occasionally. We text maybe once or twice a month, just checking in on each other's lives. It's completely platonic, Chelsea. We're friends, nothing more." "Friends who discuss important life decisions together?" Nathan's eyes widened with surprise. "How do you know about that?" "Because I just spent an hour listening to your mother facilitate a reunion between you two. Veronica called while we were cooking. She's moving back to Colorado for 6 months, and your mother immediately invited her to dinner this weekend, without consulting you, without even acknowledging that you're engaged." Nathan stood up abruptly, beginning to pace in front of the fireplace. "Mom invited Veronica to dinner?" "More than that. She encouraged Veronica to call you directly, told her that friendship doesn't end because of changing circumstances, made it clear that she considers Veronica part of your extended family." "Chelsea, I had no idea." "There's more," I interrupted, needing to get everything out before I lost my courage. "I overheard a conversation between your mother and Amanda this morning. They think I'm completely wrong for you. They think you're making a mistake marrying me. They think Veronica would make you happier." Nathan stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression of complete shock. "They said that?" "Amanda called our relationship a project, like you were trying to rescue me. Your mother said I don't understand your family values or cultural interests. They both agreed that Veronica is everything they always hoped you'd find." The words poured out of me now, months of accumulated insecurities and today's devastating revelations combining into a torrent I could not control. Then I found the photograph, Nathan. Your prom picture with Veronica. You two looked perfect together, like you belonged in the same world, like you were meant to be together. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am just someone you're trying to save, someone who will never really fit into your life. Nathan sat down heavily, his head in his hands. When he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with pain and something that looked like recognition. "Chelsea," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something I should have shared a long time ago." My heart clenched with dread. Was this the moment he admitted that his family was right? That Veronica really was his perfect match? Veronica and I broke up because I realized I was living the life my parents wanted me to live, not the life I wanted for myself. He began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. She was everything they'd always envisioned for me. The right background, the right interests, the right career ambitions.
Dating her felt like following a script that had been written before I was even born. He reached for my hands, holding them firmly as he continued. When I met you, everything changed. For the first time in my life, I was choosing someone because of how they made me feel, not because of how they looked on paper. You challenge me, Chelsea. You make me think about the world differently. You've taught me that there are kinds of strength and intelligence that don't come from expensive educations or cultural advantages. But your family, I started. My family is wrong, and I've been a coward for not addressing their attitudes directly. I kept hoping they'd come around, that they'd see what I see in you if I just gave them time. But I was protecting them instead of protecting you, and that's inexcusable. Nathan stood up and began pacing again, this time with determined energy rather than nervous anxiety. I need to have a serious conversation with my mother right now. What she said to you in that kitchen is completely unacceptable. You are my family, Chelsea. You're going to be my wife. And if my mother can't respect that, then she's going to have to choose between her prejudices and her relationship with her son. Nathan, wait, I called as he headed toward the door. Maybe we should think about this more carefully. I don't want to create permanent damage between you and your family. He turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen before, fierce and protective and absolutely certain. Chelsea, listen to me very carefully. My mother just told the woman I love that she'll never be family, that I belong to someone else. She actively tried to undermine our relationship and facilitate a reunion with my ex-girlfriend. There is no version of careful thinking that makes that acceptable. But what if she's right? The question escaped before I could stop it, voicing the fear I'd been carrying since this morning. What if you would be happier with Veronica? Nathan crossed the room in 3 quick strides and cupped my face in his hands, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that took my breath away. Chelsea Morrison, he said with absolute conviction, I have never been happier in my life than I am with you. Veronica Williams is a wonderful person who will make someone very happy someday, but that someone isn't me. I chose you. I choose you every day, and no amount of family pressure or social expectation is going to change that. Before I could respond, he kissed me with a passion and certainty that dissolved every doubt Margaret's words had planted in my mind. This was Nathan at his most authentic, not the polite son trying to please his sophisticated family, but the man who had fallen in love with a working-class nurse and built a life based on genuine connection rather than social convention. When we broke apart, I saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a resolve that suggested the Nathan who had always tried to keep everyone happy was about to make some people very unhappy in service of protecting what mattered most to him. Now, he said, straightening his shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle, let's go have that conversation with my mother. Nathan and I found Margaret in the dining room, meticulously arranging place settings with the precision of a military operation. Each fork was positioned exactly 1 inch from the plate edge, every glass aligned perfectly with the knife blade. The scene would have been beautiful if not for the volcanic tension radiating from Nathan's rigid posture. She sensed our presence immediately, her maternal instincts recognizing the shift in her son's energy. When she looked up, I saw her face cycle through several expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned determination, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation and had already decided how to handle it. Nathan, darling, she said with forced lightness, perfect timing. I was just finishing the table. Doesn't it look lovely?
Mom, we need to talk, Nathan said, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard him use with his family. What you said to Chelsea in the kitchen was completely unacceptable. Margaret's hands stilled on the water goblet she'd been adjusting. For just a moment, her perfectly composed mask slipped, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. I see, she said carefully, setting down the glass with deliberate control. And what exactly do you think I said? Don't, Nathan replied sharply. Don't make this worse by pretending you don't know exactly what you did. You told my fiancé that she'd never be family, that I belong to Veronica. You actively undermined our relationship and tried to orchestrate a reunion with my ex-girlfriend. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of Robert and Amanda. drawn by voices that had never before carried such intensity in their carefully civilized home. They appeared in the doorway looking concerned and confused, clearly sensing that the family's traditional Christmas harmony had shattered beyond repair. "What's going on here?" Robert asked, his engineering mind immediately seeking to diagnose and solve whatever malfunction had occurred in their typically smooth family system. "What's going on," Nathan said without taking his eyes off his mother, "is that Mom has decided to wage war against my relationship. She's been sabotaging Chelsea from the moment I brought her home, and today she crossed every line of basic human decency." Margaret straightened her spine, and I recognized the moment she chose to abandon all pretense of maternal warmth in favor of brutal honesty. "Fine," she said, her voice taking on the crisp, authoritative tone she'd probably used during her teaching career. "You want complete honesty? Then let's have it. Yes, I think you're making a mistake. Yes, I think Chelsea is entirely wrong for you. And yes, I think Veronica Williams would make you infinitely happier." Amanda gasped audibly at her mother's bluntness, while Robert's face went pale with shock. They'd clearly never seen Margaret drop her diplomatic facade so completely. "Why?" Nathan demanded, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Because Chelsea doesn't have the right pedigree? Because she didn't go to the right schools or grow up in the right neighborhood?" "Because she doesn't belong in your world," Margaret shot back, all her careful politeness evaporating. "Look around you, Nathan. Look at this house, this lifestyle, the expectations that come with the family you were born into. Can you honestly tell me that Chelsea will ever be comfortable hosting dinner parties for your colleagues? Will she ever naturally navigate the social situations your career advancement will require?" I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, horrified but unable to look away as Nathan's relationship with his mother imploded in real time. "You think my career advancement depends on my wife's social performance?" Nathan asked incredulously. "I think your happiness depends on being with someone who enhances rather than constrains your potential. Someone who shares your cultural references, your educational background, your natural social fluency. Someone who doesn't have to work so hard to understand the most basic elements of your daily existence." "Someone like Veronica," Nathan said flatly. "Exactly like Veronica," Margaret confirmed without hesitation. "She understands your family, your values, your aspirations. She can match your intelligence, complement your ambitions, and navigate your social world effortlessly. She's everything a partner should be for someone in your position." Amanda stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment and distress. "Mom, please stop. This isn't helping anyone." "Actually, it is helping," Nathan said grimly. "It's helping me understand exactly where my mother's priorities lie, and it's not with my happiness."
He turned to face his entire family, and I saw him transform before my eyes, from the diplomatic son who had always tried to keep everyone happy into a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "Let me explain something to all of you," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I didn't fall in love with Chelsea because she was convenient, or because she needed rescuing, or because I was settling for less than I deserved. I fell in love with her because she's the most genuine, compassionate, intelligent woman I've ever met. She makes me want to be a better person, not a more socially acceptable person." Margaret opened her mouth to interrupt, but Nathan held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished," he said firmly. "Chelsea has taught me that there are kinds of strength and wisdom that don't come from prestigious universities or inherited social status. She's shown me what it means to work for everything you have, to appreciate simple pleasures, to find meaning and service to others rather than in accumulating social capital." He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers as he continued his defense of our relationship. "When I watch Chelsea with sick children at the hospital, when I see how she connects with families going through the worst moments of their lives, when I witness the compassion and skill she brings to her work, that's when I feel most proud to be her partner. Not because she can discuss wine vintages or identify classical composers, but because she has the kind of character that makes the world better." Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Nathan, we're not questioning Chelsea's character. We're simply concerned about long-term compatibility. No, you're not, Nathan replied with surprising sharpness. You're concerned about appearances, about maintaining a certain social standard, about what your friends will think when they meet my wife. You're more invested in the idea of who I should marry than in who actually makes me happy. The truth of his words hung in the air like an indictment, and I watched his family grapple with the accuracy of his assessment. That's not fair, Amanda protested. We love you. We want what's best for you. Then support the woman I've chosen, Nathan said simply. Stop trying to fix a relationship that isn't broken. Stop looking for problems that don't exist. Stop holding Chelsea to standards you've never applied to any of your friends' spouses. Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. Tears sprang to her eyes, and her voice became raw with emotion. You're my son, she said desperately. I've watched you excel at everything you've ever attempted. I've seen your potential, your capabilities, your promise. And I'm watching you limit yourself, watching you choose a smaller life than the one you could have. Smaller according to whom? Nathan challenged. According to your definition of success? According to social expectations I never agreed to fulfill? He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a finality that made everyone in the room go completely still. Mom, I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it completely. Chelsea is not limiting my life. She's completing it. She's not holding me back. She's helping me become the man I actually want to be, not the man you think I should be. And if you can't accept that, if you can't treat her with the respect and love she deserves, then you're choosing to have a very limited relationship with your son. Margaret's face went white with shock. Nathan, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it, he replied without a moment's hesitation. I love you, Mom. I love this whole family, but I will not sacrifice my happiness or my integrity to maintain your comfort with social conventions. You can learn to love and accept Chelsea, or you can watch me build my life without your involvement. But you cannot have me without her. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time, the subtle hum of the heating system, even the distant sound of wind through the pine trees outside. But no one in that dining room made a sound as the implications of Nathan's ultimatum settled over his family like a heavy blanket. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Nathan, we're not questioning Chelsea's character. We're simply concerned about long-term compatibility. No, you're not, Nathan replied with surprising sharpness. You're concerned about appearances, about maintaining a certain social standard, about what your friends will think when they meet my wife. You're more invested in the idea of who I should marry than in who actually makes me happy.
The truth of his words hung in the air like an indictment, and I watched his family grapple with the accuracy of his assessment. That's not fair, Amanda protested. We love you. We want what's best for you. Then support the woman I've chosen, Nathan said simply. Stop trying to fix a relationship that isn't broken. Stop looking for problems that don't exist. Stop holding Chelsea to standards you've never applied to any of your friends' spouses. Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. Tears sprang to her eyes and her voice became raw with emotion. You're my son, she said desperately. I've watched you excel at everything you've ever attempted. I've seen your potential, your capabilities, your promise. And I'm watching you limit yourself, watching you choose a smaller life than the one you could have. Smaller according to whom? Nathan challenged. According to your definition of success? According to social expectations I never agreed to fulfill? He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a finality that made everyone in the room go completely still. Mom, I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it completely. Chelsea is not limiting my life. She's completing it. She's not holding me back. She's helping me become the man I actually want to be, not the man you think I should be. And if you can't accept that, if you can't treat her with the respect and love she deserves, then you're choosing to have a very limited relationship with your son. Margaret's face went white with shock. Nathan, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it, he replied without a moment's hesitation. I love you, Mom. I love this whole family, but I will not sacrifice my happiness or my integrity to maintain your comfort with social conventions. You can learn to love and accept Chelsea, or you can watch me build my life without your involvement, but you cannot have me without her. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time, the subtle hum of the heating system, even the distant sound of wind through the pine trees outside. But no one in that dining room made a sound as the implications of Nathan's ultimatum settled over his family like a heavy blanket. Robert was the first to break the silence, his voice carefully measured. Nathan, this is Christmas. Perhaps emotions are running higher than they need to be. Maybe we should all take some time to cool down and discuss this more rationally. There's nothing irrational about defending the woman I love from attacks on her character and worth. And there's nothing that time will change about my commitment to Chelsea or my expectations for how she should be treated by my family. Amanda stepped forward tentatively. Nathan, we never meant to attack Chelsea personally. You just what? Nathan interrupted. You just think she's not good enough for me? You just think I'd be happier with someone else? You just think my judgment about my own life is fundamentally flawed? Amanda fell silent, unable to answer in a way that didn't confirm Nathan's assessment of their position.
I think, Nathan continued, it's time for Chelsea and me to go home. Margaret made a small sound of distress. But Christmas dinner. Christmas dinner is for families, Nathan said quietly. And you've made it very clear that Chelsea isn't family in your eyes. So we'll go home and have our own Christmas dinner, where everyone at the table is welcomed and loved unconditionally. As we gathered our belongings from Nathan's childhood bedroom, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. The beautiful Christmas I'd hoped for was ruined, but something more important had been preserved. Nathan's unwavering commitment to our relationship and his willingness to prioritize our future over his family's approval. I'm sorry it came to this, I said as Nathan folded his clothes into his overnight bag. I'm not, he replied, looking up at me with clear, determined eyes. I should have done this months ago. I let them make you feel unwelcome because I was afraid of conflict, and that was wrong. You deserve to have me defend you from the beginning. The drive back to Denver was quiet, but peaceful. Nathan held my hand while he navigated the snowy roads, and I felt something settle in my chest that I realized had been tight with anxiety for months. Whatever else happened, I no longer had to wonder where Nathan's loyalties lay or whether he truly understood the choice he was making by marrying me. We spent the rest of Christmas Day in our own apartment, cooking a simple meal together and talking about our future with a clarity and unity we'd never achieved before. The crisis had stripped away all the politeness and avoidance, revealing the strength of what we'd built together. 6 months later, Nathan and I were married in the Denver Botanic Gardens on a perfect spring morning. Margaret and Robert attended, their behavior impeccably polite, but noticeably distant. Amanda had reached out privately to apologize and rebuild her relationship with both of us. The wedding was smaller than originally planned, but it was filled with people who genuinely supported our happiness. Veronica Williams never did call Nathan directly, and we never heard another word about her supposed return to Colorado. 2 years after our wedding, during a difficult period when Nathan's father was recovering from heart surgery, Margaret and I found ourselves spending long hours in hospital waiting rooms, stripped of social pretensions and forced to focus on what really mattered. We began to see each other more clearly. Chelsea, she said one evening as we waited for updates from the surgical team, I owe you an enormous apology. I let my own fears about change and my narrow ideas about success blind me to who you really are and what you mean to Nathan. I was wrong about everything. The apology opened a door to genuine understanding. Margaret would never be the warm, embracing mother-in-law I'd originally hoped for, but she learned to appreciate the ways I made her son happy and to respect the life we were building together.
Now, 4 years into our marriage, Nathan and I have created traditions that honor both our backgrounds while building something uniquely ours. Our Christmas celebrations are warm and inclusive, filled with the kind of love that doesn't require anyone to pretend to be someone they're not. Margaret has become a regular and welcomed guest in our home, and I've learned to appreciate her intelligence, her cultural knowledge, and her genuine love for her family. She's taught me things about art and literature that have enriched my life, while I've shown her perspectives on resilience, compassion, and finding joy in simple things. The Christmas that almost destroyed us ultimately became the foundation for something stronger and more authentic than what we'd started with. We learned that real love isn't about finding someone who fits effortlessly into your existing world. It's about finding someone worth reshaping your world for. Someone worth defending against any force that tries to tear you apart. Nathan chose me not because I was the easiest choice, but because it was his choice. And that distinction has made all the difference in building a marriage based on genuine partnership rather than social expectation. Every year since that devastating Christmas, we've grown stronger together, proving that love rooted in authentic connection can weather any storm and emerge more beautiful on the other side.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.